hello, everyone. This is Nathan Hinckley here on the Mormon Moron page. This is episode number 1, hopefully of many. I have a very exciting guest with me today. He's watched me scramble around here trying to act like I know what I'm doing, but I'm going to pull it all together here. His name is Ron Yorgason, and I am very happy to bring him in here. So let me add him, Ron Yorgason, to the stage here. Ron, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well.
Ron, thank you so much for coming on. You have a lot of, this is a pretty brave thing to do. Come on with a guy that has no idea what he's doing. Especially an old pro like you.
I'm always happy to get some airtime.
Sweet. So I titled this episode, Maybe Ron is Right. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, but this is actually our first time speaking. We have become Facebook friends for a good while now. I can usually count on at least once a day some funny meme or something coming from your way, and I really appreciate that. But tell me a little bit about just who you are. Where do you live right now?
I'm in Montpelier, Idaho. It's a very rural part of Idaho, southeast corner, just north of Bear Lake.
Okay. And I'm about an hour north of Knoxville, so I'm going to be coming in really thick with that southern accent. I hope you can understand me.
Oh, yeah, it's great. I used to live in North Carolina. This is good.
Oh, nice. What part?
Just south of Raleigh.
Okay. Yep, I've been out that way. And you're going to get into this, but I guess you had been a Mormon your whole life. Is that right?
Born and raised. I've got pioneer ancestry, polygamous ancestry on both sides of my family. One of my ancestors is John Taylor. Another one, the first of the Yorgason name was James Yorgason. He came across from Sweden. They were baptized in the early 1850s, and he came across as a young, like maybe 12 or so, in 1857. So they got the Johnston's army on one side of the river, and he's crossed on the other side, and so he comes into Salt Lake, and everyone's fascinated, like, oh, what's the news? What did you seen the armies? What do they look like? And he felt something like a hero when he first came in there. But yeah, he came in then. A little bit later in life, he ended up being quite the polygamist. He had 8 wives. So, and he was the first of our names. So if you see anybody with my Yorgason spelling, it's going to be a direct ancestor of James Yorgason. So we're all related.
Okay, now tell me about this masterpiece. What's this all about?
Oh, I was going for kind of a historic, kind of a cultured look with. I've also got a smoking jacket, and I've got my pipe over here. It's important to have the pipe.
I love it.
For a masterpiece theater vibe, but I'm going for masterpiece Mormon. And I pull in. I love Mormon history, so I love diving into all the information that we didn't learn growing up in the church, and sharing stories and finding ways to kind of explain the history so we can all kind of understand it a little better, figure out where we came from, and things like that. So
awesome. Okay, so I am relatively new to what I would call the Exmo spaces of just maybe a year and a half or so. So I know I've come across your name, and you've been on some podcasts and different things, and you've definitely, to me, kind of been the history guy from what I've seen so far. If anybody needs to know something about the past, they get you on. So that's been really interesting. There's another aspect. So recently I've dealt with some what I would call gaslighting, but it's just someone saying, "Oh yeah, you should have known that," and I'll be honest, Ron, I've seen your book collection, stacks and stacks of books. I don't have that. I'm not a book guy. I mean, I went through all of the church stuff and graduated seminary and did all the things that I was supposed to do, but I didn't do a lot of extra reading, especially in anything that wasn't preparing for a talk which I love to do. That's actually probably one of my favorite parts of the church is just, speaking. And I'm an entertainer. I play music, and I don't have any trouble, standing at the microphone or whatever. But as far as poring over books of the, different presidents and things, unless it was assigned, of course, I served a mission and had all of that stuff. So we're coming at it really at two different perspectives. And I've heard a few times, oh, I can't believe you didn't know that. So I'm going to be interested to kind of hear more from someone who has been very well read and knows the history.
I'll tell you one thing. I grew up, I loved the church. I loved Mormonism. I had a bunch of books growing up. My first book that I bought as a teenager, I found. I grew up in Wisconsin, and so there was no church bookstores anywhere near there. So going to Nauvoo as a youth, I found Mormon Doctrine in a church bookstore in Nauvoo. I'm like, this was amazing. This book had all the answers, anything you could think of, it was all in there. And I thought Mormonism was so cool because all the other churches, they had some things, but none of the mysteries. They didn't know anything that they didn't know. Like, oh, well, we can't really know that. Well, Mormonism knew it, and we had it all in this book. Dang it. And it was great because we had all the answers, and now we don't have hardly any answers. All of the answers that we used to know, that was never really doctrine. That was just somebody's opinion. Like, no, this is what it was. This was real.
Yeah. But, I could not agree more. So I've kind of found a interest or a love in writing fairly recently. That's not something I've ever done. And although I come from a family of writers, my parents are songwriters, and my brother's a songwriter, and my daughter's a great writer. But I've never known that I enjoy that until this faith crisis, if you will. But anyways, I love what you said about how we used to know stuff.
Yeah.
We claim to know things, and now it's like we don't know where the Hill Cumorah is. We don't know who the Lamanites are. We don't know. The list can go on and on. So I couldn't agree more. And as far as Mormon doctrine, that was the one book on my mission that if we wanted to rebel and just kind of break the rules a little bit, we would come across somebody's copy and thumb through and look at the second anointing and all these fun things. So that was the one book I did have a little bit of history with. But anyways, Ron, why don't we get into your story? We're not going to go quite as deep as maybe John DeLynn would go. We're not going to do a 3-hour thing here, but certainly I'd like for you to take as much time as you can, and we'll kind of bounce some things off of each other. But I really want to know more about you growing up and Mormonism, what that was like for you, and just kind of take me through that if you don't mind.
Sure. So I was born in Utah, escaped when I was 5 years old. We moved to Wisconsin, and there I loved being a Mormon there. In Utah, I could see that. Oh, we don't do that. I'm Mormon. I don't do that kind of stuff because I'm Mormon. They're like, well, I'm Mormon too. We can all do that. We all do this stuff. So I was grateful that I could grow up in a place where I was a peculiar person, and I had my beliefs, and people generally respected those, and I could just stay true to those things, and I did quite well with that. I didn't really care much about the church up until probably halfway through high school. I started really getting more into it. My first year of seminary, I mostly tried to sleep through it. In each year, I kind of got progressively more involved. I had a Baptist friend that would give me some anti-Mormon stuff, and I'd tried digging through and trying to find things and rebutting those, and I could see that I could find answers for a lot of things, and I knew we always had everything. And after a while, it's like, well, if this is the best the ex-Mormons or the anti-Mormons have, my faith is secure. So I've gone through, I've seen a bunch of their tripe. I've seen, and on my mission, I found a bunch more, and like, it's just silly arguments. They're twisting what we say, things like that. So the kind of the Christian version of anti-Mormon literature and arguments kind of didn't impress me at all. It was more just trying to keep scare their people away, and rather than try to convince Mormons of what they believed is wrong. So their version of anti-Mormon literature kept me in the church for another 20, 30 years, because I'm like, it's all garbage. I don't need it. I already know. I know my own religion. I've read a lot of these books by the prophets, and I know all these things. I've gone to all the church history sites. I've read a lot of the church history, the correlated church history books. There's an awful lot that I thought I knew that I turned out I didn't know. So all that gaslighting that you experience, it was never taught in correlated church history or classes or lessons. So anything that they've learned was coming from unsanctioned sources. But yeah, that's kind of my growing up. My senior year, I was super into the church. I was the star scripture chase person. I could beat anybody in the stake with scripture chase. Our stake mission president, or our stake president, had a challenge where he's like, this is a missionary prep thing, and here's this huge packet of all these steps you need to do. You need to do all these exercises, and you need to read all these things. You need to get one of your friends to take the first discussion. You need to go on splits with the missionaries for X number of hours. And it's a huge packet, and only 2 youth in the whole stake did it. But he promised us a steak dinner if you take us out for a steak dinner for all the people that completed it. But since there were only 2 of us, he's like, I'm not going to bother. So here's a gift certificate. Go out and eat dinner somewhere. And I'm like, I wanted to rub shoulders. I wanted my reward for having done all this work. So I was a little bitter about that. But I also served a mini mission in near Milwaukee. I did 2 weeks there as probably the summer after my senior year, or in between my junior and senior year, something like that.
17, 18-year-old or something like that.
Yeah. So that was fun. So I'm doing everything I possibly can. All the things that are in my reach. I'm doing all of it, and I'm loving it. So when I'm going on my mission, I am super psyched about everything. So I'm all excited for doing this. On that mini mission, we ran into somebody who was RLDS, and he said they'd heard there was some evidence that Joseph Smith had more than one wife. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. And it was some young girl, and I didn't hear anything else about Joseph having another wife until my mid-40s.
Okay.
So that was my only source of that, was just some RLDS guy telling me something that he'd heard. So this whole Joseph Smith having 35 plus wives, that was a shock when I learned this.
Okay. So you served a mission where then?
I went off to Alaska. My MTC experience is kind of cool. I had a MTC teacher, James Stoddard. People might know him from the Joseph Smith Foundation. He started that organization. He was the spiritual giant in my life. I loved soaking in all of his knowledge in the MTC, and he got me really excited to read the teachings of Spencer W. Kimball's, teachings of Ezra Taft Benson, Joseph Fielding Smith. He's like, you need to read these books and get those and study the teachings of these prophets. So he got me really excited about these things. So first thing on my mission, we had an LDS bookstore there in Anchorage, Alaska. And so I'm buying all these books that he's recommending. And through my mission, I'm reading all the church books that we're supposed to read. Plus I'm reading all these other books that I'm picking up. I ended up picking up a pretty good sized library on my mission. So I still didn't learn nearly enough about the history of the church that I thought I needed to know. But yeah, it was
That's
great.
that's interesting. On my mission, I ended up picking up a guitar.
Where did you serve?
Argentina, Bahia Blanca, Argentina. So
Okay,
just south of Buenos Aires there. So
nice.
had a great time. Really enjoyed it. So what years did you serve from?
I left in just before Christmas in '94 and came back just before Christmas in '96.
Okay. I was 98 to 2000.
Okay.
So anything else about your mission experience then?
I loved my mission. I enjoyed all the hardships and the trials. And like, I had the attitude where if something really bad happened, like this is going to make a great story. I'm going to love telling this story over and over again. And my kids have heard these stories over and over again, and so I've milked them for all they're worth. So all the trials and the pains and tribulations, those were all swallowed up in the joy of Christ. So I was able to suffer as some of his Christians did. So it was a great experience. I met a lot of cool people. Uh, I loved it.
Fantastic. So you come home and you get married, and then right, that's what you're supposed to do.
I followed everything because I'd learned all the church rules. I learned all the council. Like, okay, as soon as you get home, you're supposed to get married, and then once you get married, you're not supposed to delay having kids, and you're supposed to have them. It's kind of like voting. You vote early, you vote often, type of thing. So I had the same thing. I got married a year and a half after my mission, and we had our first child a year and a half after that. So I'm just starting college. I finished my freshman year, and that's when I'm just getting married just after my freshman year. My sophomore year, I'm having my first baby, and after our second kid comes just a couple, like a year and a half or so later. My wife is now a stay-at-home mom, and so now I'm going to school, working extra part-time, almost full-time, and trying to finish my schooling. So it takes me a good 6.5 years to get through school, just because I'm like, well, we can't go into debt. We gotta follow everything, um, and it was hard. It was really hard. But I did what they told me to do, and they said it would bring me happiness, and I loved it. But it was really hard.
Mm. So I didn't go to school. I did get married 6 weeks after coming off my mission.
Oh
She,
boy.
she waited on me, so I don't have those experience, but we did get married and start having kids right away. So um, uh, I guess you might get into it later. But how many children do you have?
5 kids.
Oh wow,
So,
okay, busy.
yes, we had 4 all in quick succession, and then we had like an 8-year break, and then we had another one. So my freedom clock was completely reset.
Okay, and then I'm married in the temple. I'm sure. Or,
Yep. So my parents moved to Portland, uh, Oregon, while I was on my mission. So when I came home to a completely new area. I get dumped right in before, like my dad drops me off at Portland State University. It's my first day really being in Portland at all, because I came home right before Christmas. We went to Utah for the week, and then I came back and started school like the next day. So
wow,
he's like, "Okay, I'm dropping you off here. Good luck getting home."
wow,
Okay, I hope I remember how to get home from where we live and how to take the bus. I've never taken a bus before, never done public transit, never done anything.
oh wow.
That's kind of an interesting experience, but it was good. I did enjoy school. Loved the institute. Met a lot of interesting girls there, and um, my first girlfriend I met there, and yeah, got married a few months after we broke up with her. So
Okay. So did you have callings in the church and different aspects, or were you
I,
too busy with school, or how did that go?
I did a lot of stake missionary work, ward mission leader. I was elders quorum presidency, young men's scouting, Sunday school teacher from primary. My last calling was elders quorum president. So yeah, I ran the gamut. Been a lot of executive secretary, a financial clerk, So I've seen a lot of different ways that serve in the church.
Okay. And up until this point, no serious doubts or anything like that?
I had a few things that confused me. So like we're reading, my kids love the Percy Jackson stories. And so I was reading those along with them. And as I'm reading these and I'm learning, wait, all these Greek mythology figures, the Greek gods are coming down, having children with immortals and creating these demigods with special powers. And as I'm seeing this over and over again, I'm like, dang, this is right next to Israel, where God comes down, has intercourse with a mortal, and creates this demigod Jesus with special powers. I'm like, this sounds way too similar, and it shook me hard. I kind of just sat there and like, well, I guess Satan has his copy of everything, so I just kind of told myself that and powered through it. Later, I was reading the Work of the Glory series. That was a great book series. I thought I learned a lot of church history from that. And then I get to the part where Joseph Smith says there's an angel with a sword that forces him to start teaching the practice of polygamy, and that did not set well with me either. Pressuring Heber C. Kimball to marry somebody else, and that was all, it left me feeling very icky reading those things. And I'm like, well, it's a novel. I don't know how accurate this is. I've never heard any of this stuff. This is kind of weird. Interestingly, it didn't say anything about Joseph Smith marrying anybody. The closest, I went back and looked a little while ago, and the closest it came was two characters talking about a rumor that they had heard that Joseph Smith might have been married to someone else. And that was the closest that series ever came to it. And I was pretty upset that it didn't go into more details on that.
Wow. So I have come to sort of have been known as the Joseph Smith guy in our stake. I did some firesides for the youth and went through basically all of the information that I got. I took from Truman G. Madsen. And I don't know, have you come across his what is it? His talks that he gave on Joseph Smith?
I have not heard those. No.
Okay.
He was a no religion speaker. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Yeah. So he did some series of lectures, and I just fell in love with him. And honestly, that is really what I think was the core of my testimony, was just, and I would listen over and over, and I would copy and write down, and I would tell the stories the same way he told them. And anyways, he didn't, just like you're saying, did not mention polygamy. Now, he did talk about getting Heber C. Kimball to do it and some other people, kind of like teaching it, but not practicing it.
Yeah.
And that was a major blow to my testimony.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. So you're saying, so you had a couple of those things along the way that sort of didn't really sit right.
Yeah. Some bumps and bruises. I wish I had taken the time to pick at those threads a little bit more at the time, so I could find out more about the polygamy that Joseph was doing, or more about the other stuff. So the comparisons with Christianity, Christian theology, and how much they borrowed from the other religions around them. So I wish I had spent more time at the time. But yeah, for little kids, fifth one on the way, you've got all these callings and work, and you just don't have time to really dive into things like that. They keep you so busy in the church.
That's right.
Another one that really bothered me. I loved Gordon B. Hinckley. I loved Thomas Monson. They were my favorite prophets. They were, throughout most of my life, they were the ones in charge. And then Nelson comes along, and the first thing he does is declares Mormon a victory for Satan and offending God. And we just had spent the last 8 years on this "I'm a Mormon" campaign, and the Meet the Mormons movie at the mission pass along cards, and then all of a sudden he's throwing my men, my prophets, under the bus, saying that, oh, those prophets they weren't as close to God. They clearly didn't know how offensive it was to him. But I'm righteous enough. I can see that this really offends God, and it's a victory for Satan. And it was complete bollocks. I had no use for Nelson after that talk, and that was one of his first ones. So it was kind of weird. I'm a believing member, and I'm like, well, he's really old. We'll get a real prophet next time. But I just don't like this one. And that was the first time I'd ever kind of experienced that. Turns out Nelson lasted a lot longer in his role as prophet than my testimony did.
So what you're describing, I mean, I'll just be honest. That really encompasses my whole thing. It's just the fact that if the prophets can be that wrong, then what good are they?
Yeah.
And then so we're just told, oh, well, you just have to follow, whoever the current. It's like, I don't want to follow the current prophet. Like, I want to know what you say, that this is true, that they speak with God or they get their revelation or whatever. But, we have to stop claiming that if we're going to quit losing people. That's just all there is to it.
Yeah, I thought this was God's church, not Nelson's church or Mawson's church or Hinckley's church or whatever. They're supposed to give us timeless information that's supposed to last longer than 20 years before it becomes officially no longer doctrine, or never was doctrine, or just somebody's opinion.
Okay, so you're starting to you're getting rubbed the wrong way by some things that Nelson's doing, and I was too. I'll be honest there. Then what?
I came across a prophecy by Brigham Young that kind of threw me for a loop. Found in the Journal of Discourses. I wasn't searching for any anti-Mormon stuff. I just came across something from the Journal of Discourses. Brigham Young it's 1864, 1865, right before the conclusion of the Civil War, and he's making a prophecy that the whole Civil War is just a waste. It's not going to solve any problems. It's not going to free the black. The only one who can free the black people would be God, and so this whole war is just a waste of lives. It's like, well, the Civil War ended and slavery ended, and they were freed. So obviously, this revelation or this prophecy that Brigham had was not at all right, and that was kind of weird. I didn't know of any false prophecies that prophets had made, but that was kind of the first one I'd found. So that was also another crack on that shelf. I just kind of set those things aside. I'm like, well, I don't really know much more of what that's all about. But then 2020, I'm Elders Quorum president. I'm completely burned out. I've got a high demand job. I've got a small farm in Ohio that's a ton of work, built in the 1850s. So it's an old farmhouse, lots of interesting stuff that we need to do to maintain it, and all the animals. And then I have this high demand religion, and then I have a high demand calling in this religion. So I've got the Elders Quorum presidency. I've got 4 teenage kids, and they all need to be in activities that we live in a small branch. So we're on the very edge of the branch. So every activity is far away. Every early morning seminary thing is far away. And I was trying to do it all, and I was burned out bad. And so we're thinking of moving to Idaho the next year, but my son's in kind of a cool program at school, and I'm thinking, well, maybe we'll just stay the last 2 years. Maybe I'll stay with my son the last 2 years as he finishes this really cool program, and then I'll join the rest of my family in Idaho. But if we do that, maybe I can just we'll sell our house, move to a different ward, and then I'll just kind of relax, and I'll just kind of go in and take the sacrament, and do sacrament meeting, and then just leave. And this was my fantasy at the time, of just kind of just being a low maintenance type of thing, low effort, just kind of show up, do the sacrament meeting, and then leave. Don't worry about callings. Don't worry about getting to know the people. And this was my fantasy because I'm just so burned out. About this time, then some of my friends that I had known from North Carolina, they start discussing polygamy on their Facebook page. And apparently they were people that I really respected, and I knew them. I home taught them. I was really close to them. And it was strange that they would be separating themselves from the church and then kind of just having these discussions. And they weren't threatening. They weren't saying, oh, Joseph Smith did this, and no, this is evil, and this was all wrong. They're just kind of inviting some discussions on polygamy. And I'm like, well, I come from polygamous stock on both sides of my family. I know church history. I know it all. I'll pitch in and help these poor misguided souls and see if I can kind of bring them back a little bit. And I kind of explained my history with more polygamy and how I knew it was a real principle, and they just kind of pat me on the head and say, that's nice, Ron. Why don't you do some, when you get a chance, why don't you read up on some of this other stuff? And then it kind of happened a couple of times, and then finally a month later, I came across another discussion online, and there was again talking about a book about polygamy. I'm like, okay, it's time I finally dig into this. And it was one of the genre of Joseph fought polygamy type of books. I can't remember which one it was offhand. But I started reading this, and it shook me hard because this is stuff I had never heard. Here's Brigham and Heber starting polygamy on their own in England behind Joseph's back, and there's all these weird things. They've got the Cochrans from Maine that they're kind of picking up some of these ideas from. And then Brigham hijacked the church out from underneath Joseph. And this freaked me out. I'm like, their arguments seem sound to me from anything that I knew. And they had good arguments for it. So I had good sources for everything. So I went back to my friends like, hey, this is what I'm reading. Do you guys know anything about this? And they're like, well, try this book over here, this In Sacred Loneliness. Try the polygamy Year in Polygamy podcast. Look in this general direction. And so I started reading those, and I'm like, okay, this makes a little bit more sense. Joseph did start it, but there's this whole big art phase where Joseph was denying polygamy, and so a lot of Mormons can't have Joseph being a liar, so it's better to say he fought it, and then Brigham Young started it all. So that's what really triggered my real faith, the crisis phase, my faith journey, because I just had to know what the hell this was all about, because this is all new stuff to me. So that took me a couple of months to go through all of that. And by the end of those few months, I'm like, well, this is, I decided, I was like 95% sure the church was wrong. Then I finally come across the CES letter, and I'm reading all these things, and I'd already learned most of all the stuff in it, but kind of seeing them all in one place, it just kind of left me with a sick feeling. But I had always had these really cool spiritual experiences. Some of them were from my mission, some a little bit later, and I couldn't really justify or explain those feelings. So I get to the end of the CES letter, and there's a link to a video that's similar to the Spiritual Witnesses video on YouTube, where it explained a bunch of people from different religions testifying of how they know their religion is true, and the spirits touching them all. And it's like, this isn't what I thought it was. So that was the last straw. I saw that those experiences that I had were very special. They weren't the Spirit of God. They weren't giving me any divine instruction. They were very important to me. Interestingly, one I had just a few weeks before this, as I was pondering about polygamy and Joseph's participation in it, I decided that if God really wanted polygamy implemented, he would have he would have followed the pattern that he followed with Joseph and Mary, where an angel came to both of them, told them both that Jesus is going to be born, so they're all on the same page, they're working together, they know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, the angel is only coming to Joseph, threatening him with the sword, not even explaining to Emma most of what's going on. He's marrying women behind her back. He's using manipulative tactics to pressure women into marrying him. And it was just awful. But I like, if God really wanted this, the angel would have come to both Joseph and Emma. They would have used non-coercive tactics. They would have brought people in without coercion. And it would have been a much smoother incident practice. God says his house is a house of order. And interestingly, that's in D&C 132, which I found kind of amusing because that's the least orderly doctrine ever implemented in the church. But as I pondered on this, I had a very strong confirmation in my heart, as strong as anything I'd ever had, that if that's how God would have done it, if he wanted to do it that way, if God wanted this doctrine taught. So this is the first time I'd experienced something like a spiritual confirmation that didn't jive with what the church told me it was. Mm. So learning these things a couple of weeks later from that video, I realized that these are just deep-seated beliefs, things that reinforce these ideas that mean a lot to me. And that's what kind of causes some of these feelings to come.
So when you were going through this and kind of coming to this realization, were you vocal about it with anyone, with your family or with friends or with leaders, or did you meet with the bishop or anything like that?
My wife knew that I was having some questions. I showed her the section from the book that I was reading from the Joseph Fought Polygamy book, and it startled her what I showed her. But then she didn't want anything else to do with my journey. She didn't care to learn what I was learning and had no interest in following me. So I mostly left her alone, and it was just me and my two friends on Facebook that I'd kind of talked to a little bit, but it was COVID. It was in the swing of things right there in the fall of 2000. It was lonely. I found Mormon stories, and that helped me see how other people experience these trials, things that they did wrong, things that worked great for them. So it helped me avoid a lot of big mistakes in my early days of my transition. Let me see that there were a lot of varieties that I could go with my faith. Some people remain Christian, some people were atheists, some people were agnostic, and they just found different ways that they could explore their post-Mormon life, and that gave me a lot of ideas on how I wanted to do things.
So you essentially just stopped attending, or did you remove your name, or how did that all go?
So I emailed the branch president, and I gave him a letter that I had written. And I'll actually read it here because it was important to me in my transition. It was something I needed I gave to my wife, and I posted it online so people could understand what it was like to go through a faith transition, because it was incredibly tough. Your whole world kind of goes upside down.
Right.
So this is what I wrote. I have this up on Reddit on the Our Mormon page. But I wrote, during our lives, we work on a great puzzle. We take information, ideas, people in action, and put them into our puzzle. We have lots of different sets of puzzle pieces that we can pick from. And the picture we're making is always changing. For instance, a new job might require ripping out some existing pieces and putting in a new set. Likewise, with a new school, a new home, or a new mate, we might rearrange the puzzle pieces so that we have this one section for religion, another one for family, politics, hobbies, etc. Whatever we find important, we find a place in our puzzle for it. Sometimes there's an empty space, that we can fit in something small. Other times we have to take out other pieces to make room for something big. With so many pieces available, we all end up with different pictures. Some people can choose pieces that take all of these sections and create beautiful pictures of life. To make our puzzles easier to figure out, there are sets of pieces that come with a lovely picture on the box and instructions on how to put it together so that it fits nicely with all the other sections. Each religion has its own set of pieces, and each with varying degrees of strictness on how the pieces should be put together. My puzzle has some really beautiful components. There's a religion set that I've always used, and I've connected it firmly with all the other parts of my puzzle. It comes with a nice picture on the box and direct instructions on how to order the pieces. There are people on hand to help you put the pieces together correctly, and as long as this part of the puzzle looks like everyone else's, you can get along great with everybody else using the same set. The picture looks lovely. You tend to forget about the people who might judge you if it doesn't look enough like theirs, or that the makers of the set can take it away from you if you flat out do it wrong. You end up willing to do whatever it takes to keep that pretty part of the puzzle in place. As pretty as this set is, though, it has some pieces that are dark and ugly. It's very confusing. Because they don't fit well with the rest of the instructions in the set. Excuse me.
You're good, Ron.
They were used in the original and early instructions, and some were still used until relatively recently. But over time, people realized that they can make prettier pictures without them, and while the original instructions insisted that these were very core pieces, we're told now not to use them. Some of these pieces might be used again in the future, but don't worry about it because we're not using them now. In fact, don't even think about those pieces too much because you might start seeing problems with the pretty picture in the areas they used to fit. Once you start seeing those flaws, you might start seeing more that you've always glossed over because you were enamored with the rest of the picture and wanted to make sure that part looked like everyone else's. The problem is these puzzle pieces are so bad that you wonder how they ever came in with the set to begin with. The set claims to be a universal set that everyone should use and that it's always right for the world at the time. But these pieces that were core to the set were never right. And if those parts aren't right, how many other pieces in the set aren't right either? In facing that question, I risk losing. Excuse me. Oh. In facing that question, I risk losing this beautiful part of my puzzle that I've been working on my entire life. It gave structure to the entire image as almost every other part that touched it. If I rip it out, to replace it with another set or try to come up with my own, will the new one look as good as the old one? Or bring me as much happiness and satisfaction as I received from making making my old one look like everyone else's? Will it damage the puzzle pieces of those that I'm closest to? I know the old set very well. I'm responsible for helping my family put their pieces together in a way that will bring them the most joy and satisfaction. If I rip this set out, what will happen to theirs? How can I show them what to put in their puzzles if I no longer know what should be in mine? My wife and I have been working on our puzzles together. What will happen to our puzzles if they no longer match? Or I can pretend these bad pieces from the set aren't so bad. I can put them back in the box and forget about them. Or tell myself that someday it will make sense why they were there to begin with. I can leave my picture as it is and keep trying to make it look like everyone else's so it doesn't stick out, and tell everyone that this is indeed the best set to have in the world.
Mm.
Sorry about that. Still gets me.
That's actually beautiful. I appreciate you for sharing that. That comes really close to describing the way I felt, but I feel so, I guess, I had my wife and my family and people with me, and if I and it was still, I mean, it put me in the hospital. I'm in the emergency room twice. I
Wow.
mean, it was horrible. I
Yeah.
was just a couple months away from my daughter and her um, newly baptized boyfriend of getting married in the temple.
Wow.
And when I was just, all of this was piled on me, and your analogy with the puzzle, it's spot on. I'm like, but what about all of this stuff? And I just had to accept that it's not what I was taught. It's not what they told me that it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as much as I want it to be, or I could, like you said at the end there, I could just play along and act like, just act like it's the best thing ever. It's not. And I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Ron, but that's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks. So I sent that to my family, and or at least my wife and my branch president, along with my resignation from elders quorum presidency. And I showed up for a few more weeks, just kind of taking my kids to church. It was during COVID, so we were just having a sacrament meeting. But then after a few weeks of that, they closed things down again for the winter, and so I just kind of stepped away from there, and it was just all home church so that my wife and kids would watch.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So
that takes us to fall of 2020. So I'm spending a lot of time just poring over all the Mormon stories videos, learning everything I can. I'm reading all sorts of books from like Michael Quinn and things like that. Just anything I can to learn what really happened. And I'm telling stories to my kids and things that I'm learning about church history. One day, my son and I, oldest son, are riding in the car, running errands, and I'm just rattling off all these stories that I've been hearing about that are making me mad. And he's just sitting there, kind of just listening, being quiet. And he said he was almost to the point where he was going to tell me to stop. And but then he's like, "Wait a second. This is really crazy. None of these stories are making sense. My dad is right. This doesn't sound like something from a true church." And then he started listening more and more, and he's like, "Yep, I'm done." So kind of in that trip to the store and back, he followed me out of the church, and he had struggled a lot with the church. There was a lot of shame and guilt that they piled on and made things ugly for him. Like I found out later that in his baptismal interview when he was 8, the bishop was asking him about masturbation, and that kind of threw me for a loop. So there was just a lot that he had gone through, and he'd suffered from bad depression. And it was hard for him the next year, and finally, yeah, he we'll get to his recovery a little bit later, but that helped him a lot, just being able to step away and start living more of his authentic life as well.
mm-hmm.
That winter, like February or so of 2021, my wife goes ahead to Idaho, and I'm trying to pack up the house and get all the farm stuff all ready to sell. And we end up moving in February and May of 2021. That's a ton of work as well. I hate moving. But I've got this faith crisis, the crazy job, the farm, and everything else going. At least I don't have church anymore, but going through the faith crisis is even more exhausting because you're spending a lot more time just studying everything, trying to figure out what was going on.
Ain't that the truth?
So finally moved out to Idaho. It's the middle of nowhere. It's like 90 minutes to the closest town that's big enough for a Walmart. So it's very remote, rural Idaho. Our marriage has already been struggling. The faith crisis made it struggle a lot more. And then that fall, we start taking marriage therapy, counseling. And in Montpelier, Idaho, you end up with a LDS therapist. And the first thing we do is like, well, let's knock out, let's get this topic covered first, the leaving the church. So kind of talked about that and he made it clear that there was never really a valid reason to leave the church. So I was hoping that he would be able to explain to my wife how hard it's been for me this past year with my faith transition and trying to gain my footing on everything. And instead, he just lets her know that I didn't have a valid reason for leaving the church. So I wasn't all that impressed on that first visit. We went a few more months before we discussed it was time for my youngest child to be getting baptized later that year. And I was not going to give my consent for his baptism until he was old enough to understand the commitment he was making and have informed consent. He had to know more than just the slick marketing brochure version of the church. He had to know the good and the bad and to decide he still wanted to be a member. And she told me that I shouldn't have any say in how our kids were raised. And that was kind of the breaking point there. So it was already on its last legs, and that just kind of kicked it down. And I knew that there wasn't really a way to come out of that. So separated a few weeks later, and my oldest son came with me, and that's when let him be who he wanted to be. He could never be who he wanted to be with my wife kind of in charge. So he had serious depression for a good portion of his youth growing up. But once we were finally able to move out and he could be who he wanted to be, he really blossomed. He has become an amazing young man. He graduated school with like a 3.93 GPA and excellent worker. He's got a good scholarship off at the University of Idaho, and he's doing very well for himself. So I'm very proud of how he's done. Being able to decide things for himself really made him blossom.
So it seemed like your recommendation for baptism, looking at it now, is perfectly reasonable. But that the child would understand. But I can remember just a short time ago that I would have seen it from the other side. And that's just so tough that the church continues to put people in situations like that.
Yeah. I'm sure as my wife saw it as a TBM, she saw me have already pulled away one of her children. So now she's got an empty seat in heaven in this Mormon sad heaven version that they have. And so me being there made it possibly seducing more of her kids to the dark side would have been just awful for her. Yeah.
So does that bring us then to the current day, or is there any other?
Those are the big events. Now I've since I got my new place, I was able to organize things how I want. I can do my own hobbies all that I want. I started going to all these DIs in Utah and Idaho and pulling all the church books I could find. So I've got all the writings of the prophets and all the doctrine. I have all I know where all the bodies are buried. So I have everything there that they used to teach. So I wanted a good collection of that. Then I came across an interesting meme. Um, let's see, it was I've shared this in a couple of podcasts, but it was a plant, obvious plant meme. It had a barn scene. It's a romance book cover. And it has some very strong, muscly guy, bare, ripped open shirt or something with a girl, also in a very seductive embrace. And the title was "Meet Me in the Sex Barn." And I saw that, and like, that's totally Joseph Smith and Fanny. And someone needs to make one of these books, because this would just be a fantastic book. And after a while, uh, someday somebody has to do this, and I'm like, well, why don't I do it? Why don't I write some of these books? I can try it out and see what it's like. So I came up with a plan to do like a Nauvoo trilogy, kind of in a romance genre. You see all the gossip and smut and everything going on, and I could just be a historical fiction romance novel and be very, very accurate and still have tons of drama. I can fill in a few of the blanks that we don't have with best guesses and stuff, and make it absolutely fantastic. So I've gotten a little bit of ways into that, but I just started collecting all these other books on Mormon history to do that, and then I got more and more, and then I read the footnotes, and then they reference the other books, and then I get those, and pretty soon I end up with thousands of books piled all around me.
I've seen your pictures.
Yeah,
That's probably only a few of them.
it was about half, maybe a third to a half. Yeah.
Okay. So does that bring us to? I wanted to talk a little bit about this. Maybe Ron is right. Is that an appropriate time to talk about this?
Sure.
So when I wrote this little Facebook post, I had come across something that you wrote, and I was just like, "Wow, that makes sense," you know. And I reached out to you. I think it was the first time we had ever communicated, and I was just like, can I copy this, or can I paste that, or whatever? And you kind of laughed, and you said, I think I've converted more people to this than I ever did, in Mormonism. So tell me what that was talking about. And then I wanted to ask you a couple other questions about it.
So I went very quickly from Mormon to Christian to agnostic in just a space of a few months. And then over the course of the next year, I come across some other ways of looking at the world. And I kind of settled on apatheism. So I don't care whether there's a God or not. So I looked at the purpose of religion in the world, and it looked like it was primarily kind of from a Darwinistic kind of point of view of the productive things that the religion does, is it ties a group of people together with a shared morality so that they can cooperate and work together. And so each religion will have its own set of morals. It says, hey, this is the moral compass you need to follow. And that's kind of what distinguishes each religion from each other. So when I left the church, I decided I had to find my own moral compass. So I picked out things like, well, empathy for others is a key one. Because that was what kind of led me out of the church. Is I'm like, well, I can see how the church is hurting all these other people. At first, I thought, well, okay, maybe it might not be true, but at least it's a good place to raise a family. And then I see what it's doing to my oldest son. I saw what it did to him. I saw what it's doing to a lot of other people. I see the abuse cover-ups. I see a lot of other. I see the problem that comes with the morality culture that it comes with, the chastity culture. It's very unhealthy. I'm like, well, okay, so it's not even a good place to raise a family. So I need to find this empathy is kind of what helped me understand that the church isn't really such a great place to be with to begin with. Integrity is still really important to me. I need to be honest in my dealings with others. The church was not honest in how it portrayed its history to me, and I was pretty upset about that. But integrity was a good, important thing to me. And then for kind of like personal choices, it was kind of a rational risk versus reward. It wasn't a sin to do something, but you make bad choices and you're going to suffer bad consequences. So doing meth or heroin is low reward, high risk. So I'm not going to be doing that. If something looks like it's going to be fun, but it's kind of dangerous. I might want to see what I can do to mitigate some of the risks, so it's not quite so dangerous. So see, then I can kind of decide that way how I'm going to make my personal choices. So I've kind of built my framework on this, and then when I had that, and I was very happy with it. I was pleased where it was framed. It was going to lead me to the type of person I wanted to be. So it's a very simple set of rules. It's not like the thousands of rules in Mormonism you have to follow, where you just can't do everything. So you just get used to not doing things. And then you lose track of which ones are the big ones and which ones are the little ones. So a lot of people start making some big mistakes just because they're just used to making mistakes in Mormonism. So I have a simple set of rules that I wanted to follow, and I wanted to be this type of person. So I don't violate it very often. When I do, I'm like, okay, this is a mistake I made. I need to add this part better into my morality, so I can build on it and adapt as I grow and I learn. I can make it better. And I think it's very important for people to learn to manage their own moral compasses. I experienced a lot of self-growth from doing this and trying to figure out what makes a person good and how I can become a better person.
So when I met with the stake president, we talked about this a little bit, and that was one of his questions to me. He says, "Well, what are you going to, how are you going to make your decisions?" Or I think he even said your moral compass or something to that effect. And I just really didn't know exactly how to answer the question at the time. And I think I had come across what you had wrote really soon after that, and I'm like, well, there's a good answer, and that stake president is a great friend and a great guy. He wasn't putting me down or challenging me. He was genuinely curious, basically saying, well, if you're not going to have, God and the church and the prophets, how are you going to know how to live your life, basically. So it really resonated with me what you had wrote there. And so I copied a lot of that and then wrote, maybe Ron is right. And played around with woe unto those that call wrong right, which I looked it up. It's actually not, the scripture is, I guess, evil, but
Yeah.
So one thing that did happen after I posted that, my mom called me right away. She says, "Oh no, you're not going atheist, are you?" And I was like, "Mom, you know what? I'm just, I don't know. I always had the answers before. I always knew exactly what the brethren told me. And I'm okay now with not knowing. And I loved that answer that you gave, because you basically said, I don't really care necessarily if God exists or Jesus exists. That's not what I'm basing my life or my morality on, or whatever. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I got to that point where I'm like, well, if I die and there's a God and he rewards me for being a good moral person, then that's great. But I don't have to have some belief in him or listen to somebody to come figure out how to become a good person. I could learn how to become a good person following my heart. If I die and there's a God and he punishes me because I didn't believe in the right interpretation of a story about him, then he's not really a God I'd be interested in worshiping anyway.
right.
And if I die and there's no God and there's no afterlife and this is all that there is, I will be happy knowing I lived a good life and I did the best I could to make the world a little bit better place around me. And that's enough for me. And so I just didn't care if there was a God or not because it doesn't impact how I'm going to live my life. So that's where the apatheism comes from. As for the argument that without religion, how are you going to know what's right or wrong? I've heard that argument a lot, and people have said that to me, and then they've realized how I'm living my life. I'm like, well, I guess you don't really need religion to be a moral person. I can see you're doing this just fine. But also, you can't. Religion isn't a good basis. There's not a. They say that there's a obvious standard, a clear standard of what's right and what's wrong with your religion, except there isn't. It's whatever they happen to say at the time. Like Nephi slayed Laban, murder is bad, but if you get a feeling, then maybe murder is good if you think that God is telling you to do it.
No.
Well, actually, probably not.
Right.
If you're basing whether you can kill somebody based on a feeling that you have, that's a dangerous way to do it.
Right.
So there's all sorts of things like that where religion and your moral things just changes all the time with your religion. I mean, tattoos used to be a horrible sin. Double piercings used to be a horrible sin. Drinking coffee didn't used to be a sin, and then now it's something so severe that it's worth separating you from your family for eternity. The moral compass in Mormonism is so messed up because they place high priority on things that don't matter, and then they don't care about things that really do matter. When I go to a bishop's interview, they don't ask me how good of a person I am, how loving I am, how supportive I am to other people. They're like, are you paying us the right amount of money? Are you drinking coffee or tea or alcohol? Or are you doing these things that they're trivial, but they're outward for showing our obedience in certain ways that makes it look like it's okay.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Maybe Ron is right on that. I wanted to ask you one other question that I've gotten a few times, and I think I know how I would answer it, but I'd like to hear how you would answer it.
Okay.
Why is it that you would say that it seems pretty common that when someone leaves the Mormon church that they either become atheist or agnostic or what you just described, which is what's there we go. So why is that? Why I think a lot of people just expect, well, great, you can come to my church now or whatever. So why would you say that seems to be fairly common?
Once you have the tools to dissect and deconstruct your Mormonism, you've got a powerful set of tools, and you're very wary of being abused or lied, or you don't want to base your faith on something that's not solid anymore because you've already experienced that your whole life. And now if you're going to put your trust in something, you better have a good solid basis for it. So then you go to Christianity and you see a lot of the same problems that Mormonism has. A lot of the teachings and the chastity culture and stuff that was messed up in Mormonism. Some of those things are in a lot of other Christian churches. The beliefs and the theology. There's still a lot of problems with things in the Bible, and you realize that the Bible isn't this univocal word of God handed down in a perfect form. It's just a bunch of people writing their stories for reasons that they have at that time, and it's not necessarily a great. It's a good thing to study, to learn, kind of get some ideas, but you don't want to base your entire morality on biblical morality. We've changed so much, and society as a whole generally improves its morality each generation. Except in Mormonism, it's led by really old guys, so they're a couple generations behind by the time things catch up. So it's always slow in Mormonism. But people were using the Bible to justify slavery. Brigham Young thought that black people were cursed and deserved to serve others. And just kind of as this generation goes by and people's morality improves, we learn more, we learn to do better, and we can kind of share our ideas on how to become a better people. And there's a lot of things in the Bible that 2,000 years ago that were not that great. And if we're still following these things, like women being silent in the church, you can't have women talking there. Like, we can see that that's BS. Jesus himself said that if you divorce and remarry, you're committing adultery. And you're like, well, that's not very helpful. We can see that's not quite right. But even it's the words of Jesus that everyone kind of ignores. So we can kind of, our morality improves. We see we develop empathy. We see what people are going through, and we can learn how to be better. People that are fundamentalist Christian that insist we have to follow things way back then, or however they decide to interpret it, is not necessarily very helpful.
I see. That's a lot better answer than I would have said, but I would have tried to say essentially the same thing. So, Ron, I appreciate that. I don't know, is there anything that we've left out, or anything that you wanted to cover? I appreciate you for taking just over an hour and letting me know more about your story and your history. And you've always been so kind of intriguing to me, just like, oh, this guy knows everything. If someone messages me some question, I don't claim to be some know-it-all or whatever. But I know people, and so you're one of my guys I've got on speed text or whatever. Like, Ron, what's the answer on this? So I appreciate that, and regardless of this podcast or anything, I count you as a friend and have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more than just a daily funny meme or something. So wanted to thank you for taking the time. But was there anything that you had left out, or?
Yeah, so some of my current projects, I mentioned running some stories. I've written some short stories. They're kind of on the sleazier side of things, kind of fall into this Mormon smut genre. There's not a whole lot, and I've been so puritanical in my whole life, so it's kind of fun to explore a little bit more on the racier side. I'm still not very racy. I'm more of a PG-13 type of. It's as much as I can go so far, but I did create an OnlyFans page where I'm going to be posting some of these stories. Experimented with some. I've done some fun portraiture. I got a little photo studio in my house that I've done a little bit of boudoir and other things. So I'm just kind of having some fun with all these things, and I can put the racier things on OnlyFans. So if you look up Masterpiece Mormon on OnlyFans, you can see some of my stories or things that I'm doing.
Fantastic. Well, I will check that out, and once I learn how to put up links and all that stuff on here, I'll do all that good stuff. But I've learned a couple things. Number one, I need to get a better camera. You look crispy clean, and I'm fuzzy over here. But and I've learned how to hold that pipe. Let me see that thing again. Yeah, you've been working it pretty good here for an hour. Oh my gosh. So thanks again, Ron, and hopefully you'll check back in here at the Mormon Moron occasionally.
Oh yeah.
And just plan on playing around with this, having a good time. There's been ever since I did the interview with John, I think I've gained about 1,000 Facebook friends. So they really kind of keep me going, and some really knowledgeable and great people. So that's kind of the purpose of this page, is just to or this channel, just a way to reach out and for us all to kind of encourage each other. And so that's what you've done for me tonight, and I appreciate it.
Well, great. It's been fun. I've enjoyed doing this.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go, and thank you, and then thank anyone that's actually took an hour and 18 minutes out to watch this, and look forward to getting with everyone soon. So until then, take care.
All right. Bye.
All right.